And a lot of times that's probably one of the more important things to do is that because you learn like sometimes in the courses like in the beginning they give you these nice details, and then sometimes they give you some ugly ones, but they have to give you like a piece of a file where you have to like actually parse really clean up. Actually, and sometimes they also put things on this type of file. Like, I didn't know for the longest time you clean up the XL files, XLSM files. Because I was like, okay, I'm thinking it was the same way like a CSV. Like when you try to clean it, when you try to parse it, but it's different. Like, yeah.
Is that the one with the
something like that. It's more, no, see the XLSM is like a CSV, but it's more of a link. So,
Excel.
Yeah, it's Excel, but it's different.
Oh, Excel. Oh, that's Microsoft.
Yeah, it's a Microsoft, yeah. Except that, CSV is kind of spread, comma separated values, there you go. And,
Okay, we're gonna get started. Yeah, sorry for being one of the last ones here. Yeah, traffic terrible, but welcome to Orlando Python. Some people I haven't seen before, so welcome, yay. This is a nice size, I love the space. We're at Teach, by the way. They are an application and software development house here on Colonial Drive. They give us the space. Occasionally they have some job offerings and contract positions available. We usually talk about them if they have a Python one coming up, but they are mostly JavaScript, Swift, and Java/Kotlin guys. So we love them. So yeah, so Orlando Python. We are at pyorl.org. That will take you directly to our meetup page. If you want to give a talk for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes to an hour, that's at talk.pyorl.org. That takes you to a talk sign-up page. If you have an idea, put it there. And especially if you want to give a talk at a conference, I found that giving talks at meetups are a great way to prepare for that, especially to get used to live coding. The biggest fear of everyone is your program not working when you're trying to do a talk in front of a lot of people. Well, if you live code and start writing the code from the very beginning, you end up getting a lot of practice on the spot debugging, talking through the problem that you're going through, and I personally find it a whole lot of fun. That's pretty much going to be my whole talk, and probably a part one of however many, because for the first talk, we're going to do a getting started with a new Django project. And then later on, we will have beginning automation with Python. So, and we also live stream everything, which you can find us. You can find the live stream at live.pyorl and all of our previous talks at watch.pyorl.org. So, over a year ago at this point, we did something called the Flask mob. We did a mob coding session where people individually would go up to the keyboard and be told what to type by the group. We created a Flask app. There's part one if you want to go watch it. We created a Flask app that used SQL Alchemy and WTF forms to create a system to create and view Pokemon objects. And I thought it would be interesting to revisit that, not to continue on with it, but to show how you would create the same system using Django, which, depending on your project needs, is either way too much or the perfect amount, especially for getting started. So, who has not heard of Django? Okay. And who has not used Django? All right. if you're, let me pull up the actual website here. Django is the batteries included web development framework. You will use this to build your websites, manage your templates, your models, your views. It is the all-in-one package. And when you install Django, it installs most of what you will need, as opposed to Flask, what we used last time, which is specifically a micro framework. It has just enough to get you started, and then you selectively add in components to it.
So is this kind of analogous to like Ruby on Rails?
Yes.
Okay.
This is the closest thing Python has to Ruby on Rails. It's not as opinionated, but it is the closest to a batteries include, or the as many batteries included in Python. And Python's already pretty batteries included thanks to the standard library too. So docs, all these kind of things. This site you're looking at is written in Django. If you want an example of a Django site, I can go to one right now. Maybe you have been to Instagram before. They are a Django-backed website, website, API, all of that. So, and they actually, not this past year, but the year before, 2017, they had a keynote at URLSpy talking about the migration from not only Python 2 to Python 3, but migrating from Django 1 to Django 2, because Django 2 is Python 3 only, I think. Or Python, at the very least, Django 1 did not support Python 3 anyway. And it's also a great talk because they did this entirely on a single master branch across all of the developers in their company. It was quite the thing to see. But to get started, because live coding, I have absolutely nothing set up right now. So let's do a make dir into my desktop and call it. I'm just going to call it dtrain. That's the environment I just created. Going to open up that into VS Code.
Do you use a virtual environment?
Yes, I just created a Conda environment. I don't use VM, but I use Conda, but they accomplish the same thing.
Have you heard about the Pippen?
Yes. Pippen is, personally, I don't think it is, well, it's great for personal projects. It solves a problem. It's not enterprise scalable quite yet, depending on, that they have some things to work out. But it is a nice project. I think some people are a little too gung-ho about it just now, but it is trying to solve a symptomatic problem in the Python ecosystem. So I've already created conda-env just to get in here. So let's just pull that up. And okay, so now I'm in my env. So the thing with Django being a batteries included framework is to get pretty much all of it, we can do our pip install Django and just let all of it filter in. Ooh, interesting. Didn't quite do it. That's weird. Whatever. So let me just make sure I have this set up. No. I'm going to fall back to something that already has Django in there that I know works. So we should have I think it's Django manage is the, oh, what are you? Let's look into the docs. When you do get Django installed, they have a management command line utility that gets installed into the environment, and really the only time that most people are going to use it is when you are first generating a Django project. You can download templates for it, but whenever you need to create new boilerplate code, there's usually a command line utility or a program for doing so. So let's figure this out. Django project. All right. Oh, there it is. Django admin. That's what it is. Okay, back we go. So, Django admin. All right. So, available commands. These are going to be some of the commands you're going to get with your own manage.py script. However, other than doing some general Django-like things, the first thing that we really need to do with this is actually create our project, our actual Django application. So we do start project, and I'm just going to keep calling this dtrain for whatever. So this is going to go ahead and populate all of this in here, and I'm actually going to move all this back out into the main directory very quickly, because I think that's just, we already created a folder called dtrain.
Yeah, it's gonna create a
Yeah. So for my own sanity. Oh, right. I'm just going to rename you and see if that still works. Nope.
Is that the new OS? The Nova?
Yeah, this is Mojave. I'm just going to rename. Oh, this thing is still open. I should not have created a folder already. Oh well. All right. Pay no attention to the folder movements. Anyway, this is a blank Django project. This manage.py script is going to take the place of our Django admin utility for whenever we are dealing with this project. Whenever you need to run a server, whenever you need to run migrations for your database, you're going to do manage.py run server or whatever it's going to be. Don't really need to worry about this in here. What we should start looking at, however, is our settings and URLs file. Now, our settings file, we already have a handful of things in here. This is the main settings for your entire Django application. This is where you'd want to load in environment variables. Load them in here. Prefer to load them into here, so then your entire application can share them by importing the Django settings. This is where, whenever you pip install a Django app, you have to include it in the installed apps or into middleware down here, depending on the software. That's how Django knows how to auto-include the app and all of its components so that you can use it in your own files. And the order does matter. Going down here, root URL conf. This tells Django where your URLs should start looking to build out your domain tree. Templates, where all of your HTML templates are going to be listed. WSGI, it's going to be in there. You don't need to worry about that for development purposes, but you will need to eventually when you get into production. The default database is going to just be an SQLite database locally. This is where you would change it. Some places like Heroku actually have you import a database connection, database URL string from the environment and have it overwrite anything in here. But if you wanted to change it to Postgres, you'd add all the user name, user password, all the connection strings into here. One of the nice things about Django is that it includes authentication and basic user authentication and security off the bat. You do not have to implement it yourself. It's great. Also, don't edit the existing user model. Don't do it. Create your own. And then other basic things like language, time zone, localization, and then the initial location for your static assets. Then going into URLs, the admin site is already pre-populated in here. When you have when you create all of your different apps, these are going to be the this is going to be the core location that then goes to look at all of your other files to look for the sub-app URL schemes. And so I think if we just go ahead and run server as is, it should have a site built already for us. Just the demo, so you can see it. Yep. So we can go to localhost 8000, which is the default. And this is currently running locally on our machine right now. Ta-da! Exactly. Now, it has an admin, but you'll see, if you've ever seen a site like give you an error like this in the wild, that means it's running on Django and they didn't turn off debug. Boo. Don't have debug in production. Anyway, so we're getting here Django session. If we want to start using the admin tools, we need to do 3 things. We need to create our migrations. We then need to run the migrations, and then we need to create a super user so we can access the admin tools. So to do all of, so we're doing all of this before we have added any of our own code. This is all still boilerplate. This is all still what Django gives you off the bat. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that. Now, just quickly look in manage.py here.
Maybe you could get help on all this stuff.
Yeah, we just did our run server. There's also collect static, find static for when you Django and any kind of WSGI application is not meant to serve static files. There's separate things for that, and so a lot of times in continuous integration and deployment scripts, they'll run collect static. They'll send it to a different location like S3 or into a file server that's running on the same machine, but is separate from the WSGI script that is running your actual application. So, so your Python code will never have to worry about static files. We're getting a little ahead, but it's, some other fun things. You'll end up using the shell a lot, especially when you want to test out your models. It's just a Python shell that has all of your app assets already loaded and available. Also, also has your settings, so it's as if you are running your server in interactive mode, and a bunch of other things. What we need to do right now, just to get into the admin portal, is we need to do make migrations. Or actually, I think we just need to do migrate. I'm going to see this. No changes detected because we don't have any of our own apps. However, we do need to do migrate. And that's pulling all of the existing migrations out of the contrib auth app, the admin portal, and applying all sessions. And you'll note that we now have a database in here. Every computer comes with SQLite in one way or another. So this is our database for the purpose of this demo. So I do this all the time. Need to make sure the server is running. And we shouldn't have an error at this time. We now have a login. We don't have a user yet. So when you first do it, you can either go in and manually create, you can either go directly into the database and create a user in a table is just a row. But wouldn't it be better if we had something like, create super user. So I'm going to keep that there. Don't need an email address. And if anyone's watching, the password is this is a test. super cryptic. That's better than password with @30 and yeah, whatever. This app is never going online. But we now have a super user. Need to start the server again. I can type. Oh, and you don't need to reload the page because HTML is static. Once it's already loaded, who cares about the server connection? So log in. We now have an admin portal. And we can go into our users. There's my super user. And in case anyone is curious, no, it does not store passwords. By default, you get your SHA-256 salt and hash, and those are determined based on your secret key here in settings. That's all built in. We didn't have to do anything, and we still have not written code yet at all. All right, so let's write some code. In fact, we don't need to just yet either. So what we can do, manage.py, just like we did start project before, we can do start app and give it a name. I'm just going to call it poke. That creates a new app. The apps are represented by a folder over here on the side, and we already have the basic files pre-populated for us, including a folder for migrations. Now, let me hide this. There we go. So, basic structure, admin. When we create models down in here, this is how we register them with the admin portal that we just saw, and to change the default display and management system that Django gives us. Apps, basic information about the app for Django. Tests, for when you need, where you need to do your tests. And views. Personally, I also like having a folder for templates, a separate URLs file per app, and then when we add forms, having those in a separate app, separate file as well. And you can make it look whatever you want, but this is what we get just by generating a new app. So, just to start off with a model, if you've ever used, who here has used SQLAlchemy before?
Yeah.
Okay. If you're not familiar with SQLAlchemy or the Django modeling system, these are tools and libraries in Python, or tools and libraries in Python that allow you to model your database, tables, objects, rows, everything as Python classes. So to give you an example, if we wanted to do a Pokemon from the last one, we just create that there. It is a model. It's a model. And by default, every single model has a primary key. We don't need to give it that. It already gives it. We can, however, say it has a name, which is a character field with a max length of 128 because we're good database admins. And a bunch of other things. We can say if it's allow nulls, start blank, is it required or not, all these kind of things. Let me make sure. Oh yeah, so I actually need to go into here. Let me change this into our environment that we're using, and I should now have code completion in here. It might take a second for it to come up, but that is enough to run a migration on, and to at least create a new database table called poke _Pokemon, because in the database, you're not allowed to have apps with the same name. and you can't have models in the same app with the same name. So internally, the database names are going to be app under name of your model. So to see what that looks like, we can run make migrations on the entire application, and it will check every single one of your apps for any model changes based on the previous migrations, or we can limit it down to a single app. In this case, we only have a single app, but if we had made many changes and one was dependent on the other one already existing, you would definitely want to specify that app first. So we can make our migrations. App Polka can oh. So it has no idea what Polka is. Exactly. We need to go into settings and add Polka to our installed apps. And that's all it takes. So Polka is now registered with our base Django application, and it's now going to recognize that that exists. So we have in our Polka migrations, we now have our first migration script. This is, I'm trying to remember the other migration tool in Python. It'll come to me later. But this is just rolled into Django, and it's batteries included. You're going to do Django.blank for a lot of Alembic. That's exactly what it is, Alembic. That's what we used last time for the Flask mob. And Flask, it's microframework. There's a lovely chart describing the different, the major Python web frameworks and saying where they're, where they are best used. Flask is something where you're going to start small and either start small, stay small, or go up to medium. Others ones like bottle and pyramid can be start small, scale well. Django is, I expect this app to be as big as Facebook. It gives you that much power, but it also means that if you're trying to deploy this on a system, the minimum software size is already up to over 60 megabytes of code, not including the language. Whereas Flask, you're no more than 1.5 megabytes, not including your code. So it's a big difference. Hey, if you're deploying, I know that you can deploy Python and Python executables to embedded devices. You're never going to put Django on an embedded device, but you can't. Yeah, Flask or when I actually deploy things into embedded devices, I like using Falcon with Python. It's blazing fast. It's micro framework. Yeah, it's really fast. It's consistently one of the fastest micro frameworks, and that one is class-based views only. Your get, put, post, options, delete, and that's it. There's not really a whole lot of help you get with it. It's when I get a post to this URL, this nearly static URL, just run this function, and that's it. That's all it does. There's no templating involved. It doesn't give you anything like that. But it is blazing fast. Anyway, so we have our migration script. Here, it's going to create a new model, and you see our fields. Every single one has an ID. And here is our name. If we go back later and we want to change this value, or we want to set a default, let's actually do that right now because that migration already exists. So let's say a default value is just nope. Why not? If we run make migrations again, we now have a new one. And this one, instead of a create model with the existing fields, is we're going to alter a field. Here's our model name, here's the field, and the field is now this. However, we haven't run these migrations yet. I can just go, not rename, I can delete this migration. And importantly, whenever you revert back like that, make sure your code goes back to the way it was. And it's as though I never made that change. It's as though I never made that migration because we didn't, because we haven't run migrate yet. So we run migrate. It pushes all of the unmigrated migrations in our app, or by we could just do Poke if we wanted to. But now our SQLite database is all up to date, and we can now start looking at the shell.
Quick question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any, like, what would be the real world application of doing that? Not going and deleting the migrate code. Generated migrate code.
I've had one where I was using an installed app, or this isn't necessarily deleting a migration. Maybe you made a commit you hadn't pushed, and a coworker came in and changed some things. No, that one's much better. Yeah, go ahead and delete it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
You can do that until you migrate it. Once you migrate it and you push it, there are ways that you can revert back, but then you still need to make migrations. Or if you only then change the code, you then need to make another migration. Migrations are a whole other messy topic, and it's like Git. But we now have a model in there, and because it's modeled as a class, we can use it in Python. We can just import it. So we can do manage.py shell, and we now have an interactive console that we can use. Let me pull this down so we can see that. So in our settings, we had a base dir. That just means that we can go ahead and automatically import any of the applications that are part of our app. So all we need to do is do from poke.models import Pokemon, and we now have just a class in here. Oh, capital P. All right, so we just have a class. And so now we want to instantiate it. So let's create a Pokemon called Tim. He is a new Pokemon with a name of Tim. Ta-da, we have now created Tim. And we can check that because we can do Pokemon.objects.all, and no, I'm forgetting push. Oh, so we now have Tim. We need to save him.
Yeah, I gotta save it. Yeah.
Yeah. So what you can do is you can create entities. They're not pushed to the model yet, which means that you can create, let's say, that user profile. When you're creating a new user, because you don't want to edit or make changes to the base authentication user model that Django gives you, it's good to have a separate user class, or I like calling it profiles. So you can add a profile to the authentication user, and now you have free reign to name things whatever you want, and you're not going to break your authentication system. It's great. But you want to then create a new user and then create a new profile that is a separate table, associate the two, save the user, and then save the profile all separately. And then you can do commit equal false and have all that set up. But we're going to run save. Now, if we go ahead and go back and grab everything, we now have a Pokemon called Tim. And if I want to go in here and define a wrapper for him, because I like my annotations, we're going to return Tim's name. Now, unfortunately, the shell is not like the interactive shell. I can't go up and get all my commands from earlier, but whatever. From poke.models, we can import our Pokemon. We can run Pokemon.objects.all, and I'm going to pull out just the first one there, He's now Tim. All right. So we now have a Pokemon. We now have a model that we can use. Let's give it a page that we can display the many Pokemon that we have, all Tim. From there, we now can go into our views. We're just going to call this PokeView. We're going to start this by making a function-based view. Oh yeah, someone's at the door. Thank you. So the first thing is the request. Any information about the request that needs to come in, like keyword arguments, the URL that got called, user information, cookies that were brought in from the user request, all of that. We have this lovely render function up here, and trying to think of what to do first. Okay, so let's. So we want to do a PokeView. We need to import our model so that we can run Pokemon objects all and then give it to our render function. So we need to do the same thing. We can do dot models because we're in that app currently. Import Pokemon.
Quick question: it wouldn't occur if you just would have put the name of your app and then dot models?
It's the same thing.
Same thing. Okay.
Yeah, you absolutely can do that too. It all works. So we can do our Pokemon dot. Let me get back up there. Objects dot all. So that's going to call every single one. Oh, a fun thing with this is when we do this, from what I have seen in the documents, calling an index on that before, right, even though it looks like, hey, when we call all, it's going to call absolutely everything from the database. But from what I have seen in the docs, even though that's the way it looks, by adding the index to it, it's actually adding, you just get the first one there to the actual SQL call. I don't know how they're doing that.
That is some Python meta magic.
Yeah.
Serious.
This adds limit 10 to the query.
What?
Really? So you can get
That
the first
adds
10?
by 2. I'm astounded at how they can do that, even though I'm calling the function all. I don't know how. It's amazing.
Wow. I gotta write
So,
that down.
yeah.
But the object's object also has all of those available. Like you could say limit, you could explicitly label them too, right?
Yeah, it's
Same stuff.
it's Python. There are ways in there that you can build. You can either give it the request that you want. You can build it out function by function, but that's the recommended way of doing it because it's native Python. I don't know. It's wonderful. I was astounded when I first saw that.
First thing I'd do if I was optimizing code, I'd look at that and do it the other way.
Anyway, so there we have. Let me do that. It's going to give a different error. Yeah. So this is one of those weird things in Python linters where technically this object doesn't exist because it's added after the code is started, like that set adder. But because linters only look at the code as it is without actually running it, it doesn't catch this. So when I add things like this to keep me sane and seeing red absolutely everywhere where I know it works. Adding this to the end of a line disables that call for just that one line. You can if I moved it up here, then it would disable it for this entire code block. If I have it at the top of my file, it disables it for the entire file. But so we now have a list of Poke. What we can do is we call render. We give it the request. Let me double check on that. Yeah. So we actually return the rendered template. I'm going to call this Poke, and we're going to call this our Poke list. And we need to create this file first. But we now have a thing, so I'll talk about this. So in our render function, we need to give it the request. We need to tell it what template we want it to render, and then we give it a dictionary of variables that are going to be added as the context that we give our templates. To show you what that looks like, we now need to add a template folder. And I think I'm going to need to change something in our settings in order to make this work. Yeah, because we need to add template deers.
To the template folder,
yeah. So let me go ahead and do that. Yeah, template deers. I need to add template. Good catch, thank you. But, so this is now saying inside of each app, look for a folder called template because that's where the templates are. And I'm actually just going to change it to templates because plurality. Migrations, templates, so on and so forth. And because you can actually have templates for multiple apps or multiple sub-apps within your app in the same thing, I like giving it the names in there, which is why we had Poke list. This template is going to first look in here, but now we can give it pokelist.html, and now we have an HTML template. Just to quickly show what it can do. Anyone not familiar with HTML? All right, good. I know it's coding, and HTML, CSS are not programming languages, but they are good things to know. All right, so our basic div. And if you are not familiar with templating syntax, there are two primary curly brace ways of saying do some magic here. The first one are controls, which are going to be curly brace, %, and then reverse on the way out. For there, we can do things like for loops. So we can do for poke in poke list. Again, poke list was the name of the variable that we gave in the context dictionary to our render function. We can then say, I want you to create a new div for every single one in there, and we need to then say, this is where you are going to end the for loop. And let's say all I want to do is create a paragraph with poke.name, and that's all it does. That's our entire template. So let's actually create two more Pokemon in here, and just do Pokemon. Just say gen, and we're going to just call save on this immediately, or maybe not. Oh, name. It loves keyword arguments for all of its fields.
For your template, are you gonna pull that into another template that's the HTML? Okay,
Yeah,
I see.
we're gonna get into extends and whatnot here in just a second, because we want to add a form to it. So we want things to be in separate files there. Just one more, another T there. So now if we now call our all, we now have Tim, Jen, and Tommy as our different objects in there. go ahead and start up our server again. And I don't think we need to do anything else. Oh, yes, we do. So we have our template, we have our view, we have our model. Now we need to now need to add a URL to point to associate that view with a location in our application. So I'm going. Let's create a URLs.py. Nope, I did. Down here, create URLs.py, and now I need to look. I need to look this one up. I think I can just go in here. Oh yeah. So lovely thing about boilerplate code is they give you some lovely hints. So what we're going to do here, we have a function-based view. So all we need to do is import our view and create and have our path to say whenever they go here, call this view and give it a name, and we'll see what that name does later.
So Mike, so is it faster if you do it within the app versus doing it outside of what you're doing right now? Like
So-
we just created a URL.
So the nice thing about having URLs in your individual apps as opposed to having a giant URLs file is let's say you had a -user command, but then later on you want to change it. Like you had .user and you had your home page, you had your index, you had edit, you had all these different things, but you want to change it later. What this is, we can actually see this on the admin portal because this is giving, hey, this path, we want to give it this base root and then just give it all of the URLs in there, which is exactly what we're going to do here in a second. But you know, whenever you go to a website, if you type /admin and something comes up, you're technically seeing the admin portal. And there are a lot of bots out there that are specifically designed to look for a handful of keywords to try to get into your admin portal so it knows where it is. But if we wanted to be a little more secure, try to get it off of that list, maybe our admin portal, we just want to call it void instead, just for something that's different. And so if we start this server up again and try to reload this page, we're on localhost admin auth blah blah blah. Well, admin no longer exists. If we want to get back to the same page, we now need to do void, and now we're back. So if you are creating, having all of your URLs self-contained into an app allows you to change the path to get to that entire app without having to go through and change tons or have a variable like a root plus and now your things. It's just another way that you can abstract out certain repeating elements. So that is a personal preference, and there are a lot of ways to do it, but that's the one that I like. And there are 3 different things in here. We're only going to look at function-based views for now. We might look at class-based views later, which just has class name for get, post, delete, all those other kind of things. And then you just do as view, and it pulls all the URLs out of there. Or we can also do include blog.urls. What we're doing which I think I'm going to show for adding our dtrain one. What they're doing right here is,
So I've read a whole bunch of stuff on Django, but real world, do people no longer use the function-based views and they only use class-based views? That's what all the stuff I've read seems like.
If it depends. If you have views that don't share any resources with anything else, or they are only ever they're only ever one method, then is function-based views fine. There are a lot of built-in class-based views. We might actually look, or maybe next time we'll look at one that's a list view. It gives, again, going with the batteries included bits of Django, list-based view, you just give it the model that you want it to to show. You give it the name of the template that you're going to use to show it, and then you can do it automatically will have things like pagination for you. It takes care of a lot of things for you.
So class-based is shorter versus you can write.
Well, a function is always going to be less boilerplate code, but a class-based view is classes are inheritable. So you can have child classes, you can have your base, just like you would with any other Python object. And at least with the built-in ones, they're taking care of a lot of boilerplate code that you don't have to worry about. But if all you need to do is when they go to this thing, render this, a function-based view is all you need.
So it depends on what you're doing.
Exactly.
So,
Let's just go into so we can get this one done. So import path. The thing it's looking for is URL patterns. So let's say we have Poke list. Our path here would just be the root. We need to import our views, so we can do from Poke import views, so that we can now call views.pokeview, and we can give it a name, just pokeview. And just move the formatting in there. And now back in our main thing, we can either do like the admin import here, or we can do this include. What include allows you to do is associate your app URLs with a path without actually having to import the app itself. You'll notice that we have the include here, we give it a string, appname.urls. So we can do that instead. Import include, and then we can now do include. We're just going to give it the name of the app, but you can name it whatever you want. And then do include poke.urls. Now, it's probably going to blow up. So, considering this is no module named poke backslash.
Is it actually include, or is it path?
Oh, right. You're absolutely right. I totally messed that one up.
The whole time.
Yep. I have noticed that the run server management doesn't auto boot itself if something is broken in the settings or the basic components of the app. Let's see. Does not appear to have any patterns in it. There was a URL underscore in there. Let's get rid of that. There it goes. So there's our blank. We should just be able to go to localhost poke, is the URL that we gave it, and go there. I forgot to show the other template control method. Ha 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 ha. But you'll see that we do have 4, 4, 4. So we've created our 3 paragraphs for all 3 Pokemon in there, or Pokemon. It's going to keep getting me like it did the last time. Looking for, there we go. And so for our controls, we have curly brace, %. If we need to render something to text, we do double curly brace. If I resave this and then just reload the page, we should see Tim, Jen, and Tommy. Okay. So
that's about as much as I do in the UI.
I don't do much more either. Import Bootstrap, everything looks better.
Exactly.
So It is 8:09. I want to give you enough time. Are you ready to go?
I think so.
Okay, so at some point in the future, I will push this code up to the repository. It will be at github.pyorl.org, and when we come back to it next time, we'll look at creating a user form so that we can have users add new Pokemon to the database. We'll look at extending templates, having a base template that we can pull from, having includes so that you can treat your templates as though we're repeatable code, and whatever else you guys want to do. So there we go. And now,
What's the Git for you?
the Git URL is github.pyorl.org, or you can search GitHub for Orlando Python. It'll all be there. I'll get this up when I get home tonight. Let me switch over. Oh, I think that worked a little bit.
Oh, you're recording this. Nice.
Oh yeah, we live stream these.
Oh, I could stay home.
Avoiding the traffic.
Exactly, and it's when you're. I'm so focused on the live coding session, I never see anyone's comments, so can't ask questions, but you can watch it. Yes.
How do we get
Oh.
switch this over?
Okay.
HDMI switch.
So there we go. HDMI 2. Yay! Not yay.
Go. What are you guessing?
Try to monitor double. Okay. Hi, my name is Jeremiah. We're talking about automating things with Python. Just out of curiosity, what's less than 2 years of experience? More than less than 2 years? Raise your hand. Okay, and more than 2 years. Okay, we would generally gear this towards the beginners because they outnumber them. All right. Wherever you are on your path, there's one truth about programming: you will eventually encounter a bash script full of incomprehensible sed and awk magic that will make you reconsider your choice in careers. So I'll dive into shell scripts if I have to, but I generally prefer Python. And so this is mostly about taking, in Python there's, in the standard library, there's something called subprocess. You can use that to call lots of third-party things, like little CLI applications, and you can kind of mimic what's going on inside some bash scripts. But we want more magic. Subprocesses, it's pretty easy to use, but it's got a lot of gotchas as far as just trying to get started with something.
Yeah, a little bigger. The terminal.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
So if we have, I'm not used to this keyboard. So if we have a simple shell script, I went with the simplest thing possible. This is just, you know, listing the contents of the thing. Shell scripts can start off deceptively simple. And if we use a library called sh inside Python, there's a third-party library. I'll show the URL in a moment. It becomes slightly more complicated. You can do but it has a lot of magic in here. So you import this library into you pip install it into your local environment. You have sh, and you magically now have access to all the command line programs. So if you know your CLI well and you're using Git and you're using all kinds of things, you can just import those commands into Python, and you can now do whatever those commands do inside CLI. So in the shell script, you'd be ls-las. You're going to list all the contents of that directory. And here, ls becomes a function in Python. And that -las will be converted into, it's using subprocess on the back end, but you're going to be able to very quickly write something that pulls this in. Now, this is, let's go for a slightly more complicated example. By the way, feel free to stop me and ask questions at any point. So if we are on the command line and there's the newfangled IP command, this will list all the IP addresses that are on the host, the network interfaces and their IP addresses. So you get a nice listing of this. If I were to do this in a shell script, I would be like, if I were trying to parse out the IP addresses, it's very easy to get this back, but then to start parsing out IP addresses, you're suddenly in sed and awk land and other types of rather esoteric tools. People who can do that stuff are really powerful, but I'd rather stay in my Python world since I feel like I know a little bit about that. So if I wanted to list all the, if I wanted to get IP of a specific interface, there's the command IP adder. You can show Docker 0. That show command is just basically getting just a specific network interface and showing the data. So that's the command line for it, and importing that into using sh, you can look at what's going on here with IP add show Docker 0, and then I can go write a function, get IP, that is, if I give it an interface, on the command line, if those things are separated by spaces, I can just chain that stuff together and do exactly what I did on the command line. And I could say get IP Docker 0. So now that looks exactly like as if I had typed it. If I wanted to go further and start parsing out the IP address, I have a much better idea of where to start because Python, we can start doing things like the right answer is probably a regex, but who likes regexes? No. Didn't think so. So I could start easily iterating over this stuff. That gets back from there. Okay, I know I want line 2, so we're just going to, just looking at that, I know I want line 2. I know I want the IP address, and if I split on spaces, it's going to be the second thing. So I can print line. IP is equal to, well, don't mix up your variables. IP, second line, live coding, as you mentioned. Second line, and we want to split on the spaces, and then we will get the second thing, and then we can.
That 4-line in X made it seem like it was a list of lines as opposed to a single string. Was it? Okay, what's the return format for it?
Don't get anything.
I just forgot about that. It's actually comes back as bytes, bytes-like object in Python 3.
Oh, so you have to convert it to a string to get at?
Well, just try printing lines. You can also look at how to set up the integrated Python debugger. Yeah, so it's a list of strings already. So since it's already a list of strings, and in Python 3 every single string is a Unicode string, we should just be able to call lines 1 without needing to split it. So I don't think line 15 is necessary. However, because it's splitting on a single space, what you might want to do first is to call lines1.strip, so that we strip all of the spaces on the side, because what it was doing there, since it was splitting on empty spaces, that line started with 6 or so spaces.
Yeah. 0, 1, 2. So, trick with live coding: always bring a finished example.
Sweet.
That's why you need the 2 monitors, so you should have the one on the one side. That's what I do.
So,
And the answer is a regex.
example 1. I do a get IP here. The main thing that I was wanted to show past that was the object that comes back has lots of little fancy things. When you're running things on the command line, they come back with exit codes. 0 means everything went fine. If you come back with an exit code of like 23, that means something went wrong. Python, this library will actually raise an exception, so you can handle that like you normally would exceptions. It'll come back and it'll say, it magically generates exceptions on the fly too. and we'll say, exit code number 23. But you get back a lot of, if you just try to cast this object as a string, it'll do it just exactly the way you would expect to. That's why you can print, just print the results. But you do get more information about the process and the object. You can get at specifically the standard error, the standard out. A lot of the stuff that looks really esoteric in bash scripts has to do with dealing with standard error and standard out. Just the fact that you can get at this stuff really easy in a very Pythonic way, just to me makes those scripts that you're using to automate stuff just so much more readable and maintainable and than anything that I've ever seen in bash. And there's all kinds of other things that object does. The other thing that I was going to show, and here's, so there's tons of CLI utilities out there. The one I'm going to play with some here is one called Keybase. Keybase does lots of different things. Think of it like Slack, but with more cryptography. So I'm going to use that for some of the demonstrations here, but so this thing's getting back a IP address about our interface information about the Docker 0 interface. On the CLI, if I were Keybase, once you have it installed, you can say Keybase chat send, name of the user, and you can say hello, and it'll pop up and you have hello there. What this, you just do that, you just from sh import Keybase, and just like if you were, you chain it together, if there's spaces on the command line, chain them together with dots, and you can do normal Python stuff. The username is set as a variable, and the thing that we're sending is just a line. So this thing is going to do what it did before. It's going to spit out all the lines that you would normally see if you were just running that stuff on the command line, sending it over Keybase. All right. Questions so far?
So essentially, you're creating like a bot in a way. I mean, a chatbot, not a chatbot, but like a bot.
What I'm trying to demonstrate here is how easy it is to take this library and wrap just about any command line program. I'm using Keybase a lot in this example, but I'm also was going to go over some stuff with curl, rsync, whatever. The last client I had that I was doing a lot of DevOps stuff for, I tied together some Docker Compose stuff, a large test suite. I tied in Terraform to go off and do things in the cloud, infrastructure as code. There was a little Ansible in there because there was some legacy project that was using some of that. And then there was just all these disparate things that if I'd seen something like this 5-10 years ago, there would have been a shell script somewhere or some other build system that controlled all this stuff. And instead of doing that, I was able to automate all that pipeline workflow using Python instead of shell scripts.
Wow.
I find this a lot more maintainable in the long run than shell scripts.
Question. Curl Keybase, is there a list of ones that are supported, or is it anything that's installed?
It's anything on the command line. If it can be found in the local
Yeah.
system path, it'll import it. It's magic imports, which is what makes this so
Yeah, that's awesome.
powerful. You can just import apt-get, and if you
really?
need, and so if you need to install something, you just import apt-get, and then have it installed, and then it'll be on your local system path, and then you can import that as well.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So from a DevOps, what about protection of this? So is there any way you can encrypt this, or like what are your options for protecting this so no one? Because doing this is glue, and the glue has all the keys to the kingdom to talk to everything. So the issue is that if someone were to ever get one of your glue file, your glue py files,
Right.
I
I would strive to make sure that there was no keys inside this actual code that you're writing.
Mm.
This code, I would treat it like any other thing. I'd be committing it to GitHub or Bitbucket or whatever your favorite Git repository is. Those keys, just like your apps that you run in production, they should be configured from environment variables, or if you want to go really fancy, some key management system inside AWS or some other thing. But it being in Python, bash scripts lend itself very well to that environment variable thing, but being in Python, it does make it easier to leverage those fancy key management systems and other things. So if you want your DevOps stuff to be running that, you just pull in the Python library for AWS. And so you now can control the command line programs, and you just pull in what you need. It's just like writing any other Python program.
Thank you so much.
Right. So from sh import curl, getting our public IP address here. I can type. Nope. Maybe. All right. So public IP address. WTF is my IP, is some site that I can strangely remember. So if I wanted to print that, so just for comparison purposes. Normally, if you were trying to curl this stuff down, it's way too much. Text, different URL. So curl, Swiss Army knife for pulling things down. The nice thing about curl, it's been around forever, so there are thousands of Stack Overflow things explaining how to use curl. You just type that into Google, and it will tell you how to do it in curl. You paste it in your command line. Okay, that works. So you go over to your code. You basically do the same thing, though you need to put this in here. You can do this stuff in standard Python libraries like requests, and there's plenty of built-in libraries in the standard library, but I have found a lot of stuff inside DevOps when you're tying things together. You're often working with shell scripts and basically sometimes porting those things over. So just using what's there and how they did it is often a lot better than trying to go off and rewrite it in Python. So I just do the from sh import curl, kind of massage it into making it call like a function, and then you're Python. So that gets the public IP address for whatever Wi-Fi network I'm on. So caster. Again, let's just go to the finished. All right. The one that I finished is a little nicer in that it's stripping off all the extraneous text, and I'm using Keybase. I'm importing Keybase up here and sending my public IP address. I'm not really showing this to build a bot per se. It's just that this stuff is super easy to hook together, and so one of the functions on there was using Keybase to send. This is Guido. This is our Python master. He was our BDFL, but he stepped down. That was sad. He didn't understand the for life part of for life. All right.
He didn't understand the vitriol that would come with people talking about in-place assignment.
Just to reiterate I will often just take shell scripts as a starting point. I've imported makedir and just makedir-p. Rsync is all over the place for all kinds of reasons, and because it's a magical little wonderful tool. It's very easy to take existing rsync stuff that you've seen elsewhere and easily port it into this. So this is copying all the JPEG files over to a cache directory, and then we're sending a message that we're done. The Guido one I wanted to point out because we're going to simplify this. If you're doing that rsync command, you're doing rsync-avm include, but let's say in this use case over here, you're doing basically the same thing, but it's slightly different. Instead of including JPEG files, over here you have a process that's doing GIFs for a completely contrived example. Typing all that out, and let's say you wanted to change one thing, there's lots of fiddly little switches with rsync. So you wanted to change one, but you changed it in one area but forgot to change it in the other. Highly annoying. So you could, SH has a built-in way of handling that type of thing. So instead of doing this very long CLI thing where you're saying keybase chat upload -- title, that's the name of the picture that I'm sending. I'm setting this option called exploding lifetime. It's not super important what that is. It's just going to auto-delete itself. This is the person I'm sending it to, and that is the file name of the object that I'm uploading. So that looks exactly the way it would look on a CLI if you're typing this out, keybase space chat space upload, so on and so forth. But simplifying that, there's this bake command. So you're still doing from sh import keybase. And now I can take upload and I can say keybase.bake. And I'm always going to want to do this chat subcommand. There's an upload subcommand to that chat subcommand because why not? And then there's all these other options. But once you have that figured out, you basically create, you say upload equals keybase.bake. You got the options that you want to run, and now you got this upload function basically out of it, and you have this send function doing something very similar. So you can go and write that same function that we saw earlier, where it's uploading a picture to Keybase. But now all you have to do is pass a title and the username and the actual name of the file. It simplifies it, and like, so if you ever, this is a super contrived example, but you can go in here and start changing things, and wherever you use that function now, that'll be changed for. So send will always have the 60-second exploding lifetime. This can be super important for, like I said, for like rsync is always a great example, but because there's lots of little fiddly switches that you can turn things on and off, and having one place to edit that stuff in, and just having a function that will go off and do that, very powerful. There's other options that you can do with this thing. So far what we've covered is it's very much like a shell script in that we're interacting with it in, do this, a very iterative way, like step by step. But the Python, this stuff is calling the Python subpro stuff in the back, so you can expose all kinds of very powerful abstractions. You can iterate over things. You can run processes in the background and wait on them to complete. So if you need to run 10 different rsync jobs all at once, instead of doing that 1, 2, 3, you can start them all at one time and wait them. And doing all that in subprocess is straightforward, but this thing gives you a lot of flexibility. I'm not going to change that one, but if you want to do things in the background, you can create a process that's will not do -f. And doing it in the background is as simple as telling it _bg equals true. And then you say x dot. So if you wanted to do multiple jobs, it's so x and y will now process in parallel, in theory. I don't know if it's a pretty short job. I doubt you'd actually be able to tell. But all that sub-process power that you get from the standard library is there and is exposed through a fairly nice interface. The documentation for this library is excellent. It's not always, when you get into the real persnickety details of subprocess, there's a lot to it, but it's very powerful what it can do. But it's really easy to get started with it. And questions?
Does SH give you the ability to map exit codes to specific exception types?
Yeah, so if you get, let me go back to example 3. Call this exception, EX. So from sh import git. If we say git not a command, that's the equivalent of saying something on the command line like this. So git not a command. Git's going to go not a command is not a git command, as git should. But what this is going to do in here is raise a Python exception. So you get to handle errors. You can still see the exit code. So if you want to handle the error based off of some exit code, but that's actually built into the exception as well. We'll run this here. So you'll get a normal Python exception. Then you're going to get return code 1. So it says sh error return code _1. That underscore part in the number, that'll be whatever number that was the return code. So if it's a 23, I've seen 128, whatever the CLI tool you're using, it'll give you the exception number inside that exception that's raised. And it's going to tell you the command it ran. Git not a command. It's going to show you the standard out and the standard error, and it says the exact same thing you did when we ran that on the command line up there.
Got George?
Nah, I didn't kill George. Sorry.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah. So it dynamically generates the error based on the number.
There is a lot of magic in this library. It dynamically generates that. It dynamically generates the imports. I like the magic. It has, so it does lots of good things for you. So one of the things some Git some CLI utilities, especially Git, will often use what's called a pager. Pager meaning it's the process is trying to deal out some type of response as it sees fit. If you've ever done like a Git log and like tried to scroll through it and you can scroll back, you're scrolling up and down, that's the pager helping you out. SH completely does not know what to do with a pager. If you use something, if you're calling some process that is doing that, you will not have a good experience. You can easily disable the pager for these things by saying tty out is false. So I've from sh import git as git _ command, and then inside the bake for this, I'm saying git is equal to, so I'm baking in, so anytime I call git, I'm going to disable that tty thing. That gives me a way of using git without running into problems with the pager. So for maybe a slightly more useful thing, if you're using a lot of repositories on the system and you're looking for a way of trying to get the status on all of the repositories that you're looking at, I like this approach because with Python, I know where to start. With shell scripts, I'm going to be looking up I'll be Googling for way too long. So you get to use the standard, the nice standard library. I've been doing a lot of stuff with trying to move over to using pathlib. That's the same as, more or less the same as using os.path. But for repo, and so we're just using glob. So we're finding all the folders with .git in it and looking at the parent path. And this is just a small context manager to change the working directory. So if you were inside a shell script, you'd be cding to all these directories, running git status. This allows me to use standard Python stuff, context manager to, every time I want to visit a directory, when I enter this method, it's going to immediately change directory, os.changedir, to that path that I'm looking at, and when I'm done doing what I'm doing, it will change back to the current working directory. So I could say with status for this repository is just a path, so I'm going to print the name of the repo, and then I'm going to call get status -- short. So if I'm inside a repository, I would say get status, and this is what would come back. But if I wanted to do that for every repository that I have in my local working directory, something like that script is very useful. So it's iterated over all the repositories it could find. This is easy to hook up, like I said, any of your DevOps tools, your infrastructure as code. I have frequently found myself rewriting pipeline jobs that are inside Jenkins or Travis CI or something, just putting this in here. SH is packaged as one single file. So if you need to, so you don't want to, especially if you're packaging this in like a DevOps pipeline, pip installing does not work every time, much to my dismay. So just taking getting sh.py, which is just one file, dropping it in your local repository, it's designed to do that. That way when you import sh, it's right there. So you don't have to worry about network reliability to run your pipeline. So it's a very powerful little library, and makes building your own tools and automation stuff and pipelines a hell of a lot easier and sharing those builds and pipelines, like usually on a team, there's one, maybe two guys if you're lucky, or girls, that know how to maintain the bash stuff that automates everything. With this, you can, in theory, share that burden some more, because it should be in the standard, if you're a Python shop, it's in the standard language that you're using for everything else. They should be able to pick it up a lot easier than something from another language. And one of the shops I worked with was a Scala shop. They even like doing this a lot better than writing their automations in Scala. But there's enough similarities between the language. Questions? Yeah.
How long did it take you to kind of become proficient with it? So what was like your learning curve to become proficient with this?
It's fairly quick. Like I said, doing if you want to do, it's like anything. Django. If you want to do something simple, it's simple. If you want to do something hard in Django, it's possible. It's the same thing with this library. If you want to do something simple, it's pretty damn simple. I had to do some weird stuff with in some pipelines, and it's possible. If you want to build out a pretty complex pipeline, there's nothing in SH. It exposes almost every feature of some process in some way. You might spend a day reading documentation and going back and forth on things, but it exposes a lot of power in the background. So there's a lot that you can do with this. It's just that's the nicest thing I could say about most libraries is simple things are simple and hard things are possible. There's way too many libraries out there where simple things are simple, and if it's a hard, find another library.
Last question. So, does it take when you run these, depending upon your most complex tool? Does it take a long time for it to run?
It really depends on the underlying what you're running.
Right.
If your test suite takes a long time to run, then yes, it will take a long time to run. It's the overhead that you're experiencing with this program running all those things is negligible. It's no different. I don't think the performance would be any different if it was a shell script. It's the things that you're executing that is taking up all the time.
Gotcha. That's very cool.
Yeah. More questions? Go forth and automate.
Thank you very much.
So Boto annoys me, so I think I'm going to use the AWS CLI instead, using this.
I've done that.
Today I was putting with Boto all day.
There's in the amount of explanations you can find from the AWS CLI versus Boto is There are many situations where if you're developing some type of Django web service, Boto is the Python library for talking to AWS APIs. But the AWS CLI that ships from Python, AWS themselves maintains it, and you can do almost anything with it. It's a Swiss Army knife of a command line tool, and just taking examples that you see online and using something like SH, you can script these things out, especially for DevOps type stuff and quick, dirty automation type stuff. It's a Swiss Army knife.
I need that.
Back and
Thank you
forth.
so much. That made.
Yeah.
I have a question regarding, I know many AWS commands return a JSON log in response to the would SH transform that into an object for you? Or would
It's going to look like a string to SH, but JSON's in the standard library of Python. I've done a lot of things with SH and Python where if it returns JSON, I parse it right away, which there's this really nice tool called JQ for command line parsing of JSON objects. But to me, it's like send knock. There's lots of you have to study the docs. Like if I can find somebody's existing JQ thing where it's already told me exactly how I'll use it. But I can parse JSON really quick, and I can do my normal Python workflow with JSON objects a lot easier than figuring out how to fiddle with JQ to parse out exactly what strings I'm looking for. But yeah, I've done a lot of JSON stuff with command lines. It's pretty straightforward.
Is it actually funny that you mentioned I have to do something like that? I actually just call Python from the bash script.
Yeah. This is a way of just kind of sidestepping the whole bash thing altogether. Now, I still use Bash. I won't say it got rid of it totally, but it for anything of significant size or complexity, this is a wonderful tool.
In which cases do you find that you need to use Bash as opposed to using SH?
It usually has to do with the number of lines I expect to. Let me write. If I can write the Bash script in like 4 or 5 lines, and it's super simple, like it's just do this command, do this command, do this command. If anytime I'm dealing with, if I have to deal with responses, like the exit codes for the things, if I have to deal with any type of conditional type thing where I'm starting to get into a complex Bash script, I prefer this. If there's an existing Bash script and I won't just rewrite everything for the sake of rewriting it. So if there's an existing thing, I'll try to stick with the existing thing. But if I'm trying to write this from scratch and I have the leeway, I will use something like this because I think this is much more maintainable than Bash scripts that get out of hand. But I still do Bash scripts if it's really simple. And mostly you'll see those in site make files that I do. But yeah, it's anytime it's more than just trivially, some type of trivial script, I would prefer this.
Okay, thank you. I want to do from sh import Python and call the file on itself.
That's evil.
Just see what happens. Oh, well, a couple times ago, I ran out of file descriptors because we got into async stuff. That was fun.
From a sage import Python.
Ooh, yes.
It's funny because it's not your computer.
That is true too.
It's mine. You're gonna clean up whatever mess you do.
That should work just fine, I think.
Well, you're in the
Yeah, you're not.
you're in the command line here. If you just call Python empty, it will keep trying to open more Python. Or no, I guess that would have to be in a file though.
Yeah,
You could open an interpreter inside of an interpreter though.
it's internals all the way down.
Recursion and no terminating condition.
Can't open file.
Example
Yeah, simple. Call the Python file from Python.
I like it.
I'm gonna do that at work tomorrow. I'm gonna do a code review on it.
Everything I did, like I said before, this SH library has great documentation. I cannot see forward. Everything I did is in a GitHub repo, which I can't say it's the most organized GitHub repo, but all the files I dumped there. So if you need something to get started, there's the things that I showed are inside that repository.
And I'll put a link to this in the video description later on. All right, thank you again.
Yeah,
And right on time, it's just after 9 o'clock. Technical difficulties and all.
There we go.
All right. So, thank you guys for coming out this month. Sorry we weren't last week. There was another event that was going on during our normal slot last week. I'll make sure. We're already on the schedule for November, and there's not. Whatever. We're already on the schedule for November. It's going to be the Tuesday just after Thanksgiving. So hopefully families out of town and all of that. And we are not going to have one in December because it falls on Christmas Day. So we're not going to have one in December. If we do anything in December, I'm going to take people out for drinks or whatnot. Just have a little Python version of the nerd dinner. But that's entirely dependent on if I can get a sponsor for that. But I have some people who've been asking. Yeah, if you want to give a talk to pyorl.org. You guys know I have no problem talking for 2.5 hours on my own. But always great when we get some talks that I probably have heard of SH before, but that's amazing. And the fact that it's in a single file, just included as is.
It's whoever the guy who wrote it is. I'm a huge fan of.
So if you guys have any talks, go ahead and sign up. I keep checking every once in a while to see if anyone has signed up. Live stream is going.
What's the format you use for the talks? Like, how long do you speak for?
I have a drop down on there saying, is it a beginner talk, a small topic, or a long or a full presentation? And it's usually 5 to 10 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes, or 30 minutes to. If you want to take up all 2 hours, be my guest.
Less work for you.
Exactly. Yeah, so talk to py.orl. The videos, this video and all the previous ones are at watch. And the live stream is always at live. The code for the Django project that we're going to look at, we're going to revisit in the future at some point, is going to be on our GitHub page at github. Or search GitHub for Lambda Python. It's up there somewhere. The code from most of the previous meetings are up there as well. And I will see you all next month.
A quick question: has anyone done anything on Kiwi?
No, we haven't.
I'll do one on Kiwi.
Awesome. Looking forward to
It's
it.
a UI. It's a UI. So
Does it have as much headache as TK?
it's way better than TK. It's like
I can't get a freaking scroll bar to work. It should be basic.
I've worked with all the UIs trying to develop a UI, and Kiwi is by far the easiest, and it works on mobile devices. So you can take what you run on your computer, and you can pretty much switch it to a phone, an Android phone, or a tablet. So I'll do it on Kiwi because a lot of other people know about it. So,
All right.
KIVY, it's pretty awesome. It doesn't have, the documentation sucks. FYI, it's not, at least I think it sucks. And the books on it aren't really good, but if you take some time and just play with it and figure out how it works, you can do some pretty slick stuff with it.
Okay, looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'll do that.
So, thank you all for coming. And goodbye on here.